I always thought of myself and Lucy as two halves of one mind. We built a quiet life together in our little house just outside of Asheville, North Carolina. My name is Daniel and I'm 34 years old, a sculptor who's always found comfort in the messy, tactile work of shaping stone. But these days, it felt like the only things I was shaping were questions I couldn't find answers for. Lucy and I had been married for 5 years, and until recently it felt like we understood each other without saying a word. She was bright and driven, working as a marketing consultant for small businesses around town. We'd always joked that her energy balanced out my quieter, more patient nature. But in the past few months, something in her shifted. It started with little things. She stopped coming to my gallery shows, claiming she was too tired or had work deadlines she couldn't ignore. Then she started avoiding neighborhood barbecues even though she used to love those, the laughter, the music, the chance to show off her quick wit. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just work stress, but the excuses piled up. One evening, I came home from my studio to find her on the couch, her eyes glued to her phone. I'd always admired how she could multitask, checking emails while stirring soup on the stove, but this was different. Her thumb scrolled with an intensity I'd never seen, her face lit up in a way that didn't feel like it had anything to do with work. "Hey," I said, dropping my keys in the bowl by the door. "How was your day?" She didn't even look up. "Busy," she mumbled, her voice clipped. I sat down across from her, trying to catch her eyes. "Want to come to the show on Friday? The new pieces are finally ready." She glanced at me briefly, then back at her phone. "I can't." "Work thing," she said, her tone final. That was the end of it. After that, I started noticing the phone more than ever. She'd smile faintly whenever it buzzed, and if I asked who it was, she'd brush it off, "Oh, just a friend from work." At first, I wanted to believe her. I really did. I even told myself I was overreacting, that I was reading too much into it. But it wasn't just the phone. She started taking calls in the other room, her voice low and urgent. Some nights she'd come home late, hair still perfectly styled, with some vague excuse about helping a friend through a crisis. When I pressed, she'd get defensive as if I was the one making this into something it wasn't. The hardest part wasn't the late nights or the endless phone calls, it was the way the house felt empty even when we were both in it. The laughter that used to echo off these walls had faded, replaced by silence that made my chest feel tight. I'd come home from the studio, my hands aching from carving, and find her curled up in bed, already asleep. Or at least pretending to be. I tried to ignore it. I poured myself into my work, chipping away at a marble piece in my studio, the rhythmic tap of my chisel the only thing that made sense anymore. I told myself that every couple goes through rough patches, that this was just another bump in the road. But late at night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop the questions from tumbling around in my head. Where was she really going? Who was she really with? And worst of all, why wasn't I enough? It hurt to even think that, but it was there. No matter how many times I told myself to trust her, there was this hollow ache that kept growing inside me. I wanted to believe that it was all in my head. But in my gut, I knew better. And so I watched her slip away from me, inch by inch, like water draining out of a cracked cup. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't even know if I could. But I did know one thing, I couldn't pretend everything was fine anymore. Not when the woman I loved was drifting further and further from me with every day that passed. After weeks of feeling like I was talking to a ghost, I finally broke. It was a Saturday morning, and we were sitting at the kitchen table. The pale light of dawn came through the window, catching on the dust motes in the air. Lucy had her phone propped up next to her coffee mug, her fingers flicking across the screen like she was in a world of her own. "Lucy," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "We can't keep going like this." She looked up at me, blinking like I'd startled her. "What are you talking about?" I took a deep breath. My hands were shaking, and I clenched them into fists under the table. "Us. This distance. It's killing me." She gave a short, humorless laugh and shook her head. "Daniel, you're being dramatic." "Am I?" I asked. "You're always on your phone. You're never home, and when you are, it's like I'm not even here." She sighed, rolling her eyes. "It's just work. You know how demanding it is." "No, Lucy," I said, my voice rising. "This isn't just work. I can feel it, something's wrong. And if we don't face it, I don't know how we're supposed to move forward." She set her phone down a little too hard and looked at me with a mix of annoyance and something else, maybe fear. "So what, you want to drag us to therapy? Is that it?" I swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "Yeah. I think we should see a counselor. We need help." She snorted, shaking her head. "That's a bit much, don't you think? People fight. It doesn't mean we have to go whining to some stranger." "It's not about fighting, Lucy," I said, my voice cracking. "It's about losing each other. I don't want to wake up one day and realize you're just a stranger sleeping next to me." She looked at me like she didn't know whether to laugh or scream. "You're overreacting," she said, her voice flat. "I'm just busy." I closed my eyes for a second, trying to steady the rush of hurt that filled my chest. "Please," I said quietly. "Please, can we at least try?" For a moment, I thought she'd get up and walk out of the room like she always did when things got too real. But instead, she leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms over her chest, her face pinched with irritation. "Fine," she said after a long pause. "If it'll shut you up, I'll go. But don't expect me to spill my soul to some stranger just because you're feeling insecure." Her words stung, but I nodded. "That's all I'm asking. Just try." The first session was the next week in a small office that smelled faintly of lavender. The therapist was a soft-spoken woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a notepad she barely wrote on. I tried to ignore the ache in my chest as I poured my heart out, telling her about how Lucy and I used to be. The way we'd laugh over burnt toast in the mornings, or how she used to come to every show I put on at the gallery, beaming with pride. Lucy sat beside me, arms folded, staring at the floor like the tiles were more interesting than anything I had to say. When the therapist asked her questions, she'd shrug or give these half-laughs that didn't sound like humor at all. "Lucy, how do you feel when Daniel says he's afraid of losing you?" the therapist asked gently. Lucy let out a little snort. "I think he's being ridiculous. We're married. That's not something you just lose." I looked at her, my throat tight. "But it feels like I've already lost you," I said, my voice low. She rolled her eyes and turned away, her fingers drumming on her knee. "You're so dramatic, Daniel. You always have been." I bit back the urge to snap at her, to ask how she could be so cold when I was laying everything bare. The therapist watched us quietly, her pen hovering over the paper, but she didn't interrupt. The second session was more of the same. I talked, Lucy deflected. I told the therapist how I missed the way Lucy used to trace the lines of my sculptures, telling me how beautiful they were. How she used to curl up beside me in bed and whisper about her dreams. Lucy just shrugged. "I don't know what you want me to say," she said with a tight smile. "It's not like we're kids anymore." After the session, we walked out to the car in silence. The air between us felt thick, like I could almost see the distance that had grown over the years. When we got in the car, I tried again. "Lucy, I know this isn't easy. But can't you see how much this matters to me?" She looked out the window, her expression unreadable. "I see it," she said finally. "I just don't know if it matters to me the same way anymore." Her words hung in the air, sharp and final. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles ached, trying to swallow the panic that threatened to choke me. I had asked for honesty, but I wasn't sure I was ready for the answer. The third session was different from the start. There was a heaviness in the air as we sat in the therapist's softly lit office. I could feel it pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. Lucy sat across from me, arms folded tight, her eyes fixed on a spot just over the therapist's shoulder. The therapist, whose name was Madeline, looked at Lucy with a gentle firmness. "Lucy," she said, her voice calm. "I can see how hard this is for you. But I need you to be honest with yourself and with Daniel. Can you tell me what's really going on?" For a moment, Lucy didn't move. She just stared at the floor, her jaw clenched, her foot tapping a restless rhythm against the carpet. I watched her, feeling like I was balancing on the edge of a knife. I wanted answers, but I was terrified of what they might be. Madeline waited patiently, her eyes steady and kind. "Lucy?" she prompted again. Lucy let out a long, shuddering breath and lifted her gaze just enough to meet Madeline's eyes. "I don't know if I should say it," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "Lucy, please," I said, my voice cracking. "I need to know." She flinched at the desperation in my tone, her eyes flicking to mine for a brief second before darting away again. She swallowed hard, her shoulders trembling. "I've been seeing someone else." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt the blood drain from my face, my mouth opening and closing without sound. My mind went blank, and for a few seconds, all I could hear was the rush of blood in my ears. Madeline's voice cut through the silence, soft but steady. "Lucy, thank you for your honesty. Can you tell us more about that?" Lucy let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "What more is there to say? I've been having an affair. With someone from work. It's been going on for a few months." I stared at her, my hands shaking in my lap. "Why?" I managed to choke out. "Why would you do this to us?" She looked at me then, and for the first time in weeks, her mask of indifference slipped. Her eyes were glassy with unshed tears, her lips trembling. "Because I was tired of feeling like I was suffocating," she said. "I needed something different. Something exciting." I felt like I'd been dropped into freezing water, my skin numb and my breath caught in my throat. "Exciting?" I echoed, my voice low and raw. "So everything we had, everything we built, that wasn't enough?" She flinched, her arms tightening around her chest. You don't understand, she said, her voice shaking. You're steady. You're safe. But you're predictable. I wanted to feel alive again. Madeline watched us both with quiet sympathy. Lucy, does this mean you're ready to let go of this marriage? Or are you still hoping to find a way back together? Lucy's face crumpled. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking as she started to sob. I don't know, she whispered through her tears. I don't know what I want anymore. I sat there, numb and hollow, my mind struggling to catch up with what she'd said. An affair. She'd found someone else, someone who made her feel something I couldn't. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice, but at the same time, a cold, quiet clarity was settling in my mind. I watched her cry, but I couldn't move to comfort her. For the first time in our marriage, I didn't know how to reach her. I didn't know if I even wanted to. Madeline gave us a moment, then spoke softly. Daniel, how are you feeling right now? I looked at her, my eyes burning. I feel like I don't even know who my wife is anymore, I said. My voice was calm, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I thought we had something real. Something worth fighting for. But now, I don't know what's left. Lucy's sobs filled the room, raw and jagged. I wanted to feel anger, to shout and rage at her for tearing our life apart. But all I felt was this crushing emptiness. When the session ended, we walked out to the car in silence. The air outside was crisp and cold, but I barely felt it. Lucy kept her eyes on the pavement, her shoulders hunched like she was trying to disappear into her coat. We didn't say a word on the drive home. I watched the city blur by, the bright lights and crowded sidewalks a cruel contrast to the wreckage inside me. When we got to the apartment, I stopped in the doorway, my hand on the knob. Lucy, I said, my voice steady but cold. We'll figure out what to do next. But right now, I can't even look at you. She didn't argue. She just nodded, her face streaked with tears, and walked past me into the bedroom. I stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door. In that moment, I knew that whatever happened next, things would never be the same. The cracks in our marriage weren't just cracks anymore. They were chasms. And I wasn't sure I even wanted to build a bridge back to her. I didn't say a word to Lucy the next morning. I woke up early, my head throbbing from a restless night of staring at the ceiling, replaying every word she'd said in that therapy room. I could hear her moving around in the kitchen, but I didn't go out to meet her. I couldn't. By the time I finally stepped into the living room, she was sitting on the couch, her eyes puffy and red. She looked at me like she was about to speak, but I cut her off before she could even try. Pack your things, I said quietly. I want you gone in 2 hours. Her mouth fell open, her hands shaking. Daniel, please? Can we at least talk about this? I shook my head, the ache in my chest making it hard to breathe. No. You made your choice, Lucy. I'm done. For a moment, she looked like she might argue, but then her shoulders slumped and she nodded. She disappeared into the bedroom without another word. I watched her go, feeling nothing but cold, hard resolve. I needed to get out of the apartment for a while. The air in there was too heavy, too full of memories that felt like they didn't belong to me anymore. I grabbed my coat and walked outside, the early spring air sharp against my skin. I wandered the streets aimlessly, my mind a mess of anger and sadness and disbelief. I thought about all the little moments that used to mean everything to me. The way she'd lean against the kitchen counter watching me cook. The way she'd press her cold feet against mine in bed just to make me yelp. All of it felt like a lie now. When I finally made it back to the apartment, Lucy was standing in the doorway with a suitcase at her feet. She looked at me with tear-streaked cheeks, her lips trembling. Daniel, she said softly, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you like this. I didn't trust myself to speak. I just stepped past her, opening the door wider. She hesitated, her hand on the handle. Please, can't we at least talk about it? Maybe there's something left to save. I looked at her then, really looked at her, and all I saw was the woman who'd been lying to me for months. I felt like I was staring at a stranger. There's nothing left to save, I said, my voice calm, final. I can't do this anymore. She swallowed hard, blinking back more tears. But I love you, she whispered. I let out a breath that felt like it scraped my lungs raw. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done what you did. She closed her eyes, a sob slipping out before she could stop it. But I didn't reach for her. I didn't try to comfort her. I just stepped back and let her walk past me, her suitcase rattling over the threshold. She paused for a moment, looking back at me one last time. I'm so sorry, she said again, but her voice was barely a whisper. I didn't respond. I just watched as she stepped into the hallway and disappeared around the corner. When the door clicked shut behind her, I leaned back against it, my legs trembling. I didn't cry. I'd done all my crying in the hours before, when I still thought there might be some way to fix what was broken. But there was no fixing it. Not anymore. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. I could hear the faint hum of traffic outside, the muted thump of footsteps from the neighbors upstairs. But inside, it was just me and the hollow echo of everything that used to be. I walked through the room slowly, touching the back of the couch where we used to curl up together. The little chipped mug she always insisted was her favorite. It all felt like it belonged to someone else's life. I ended up in my studio, the scent of stone dust and linseed oil grounding me in a way nothing else could. I picked up a chisel and ran my fingers over the cool metal, feeling the familiar weight of it in my hand. This was mine, my art, my work, the only thing that felt real anymore. I didn't know what was going to happen next. I didn't know how I was going to rebuild a life that suddenly felt like it had collapsed around me. But I did know one thing. I wasn't going to let her betrayal be the thing that defined me. Not now. Not ever. After Lucy left, the apartment felt like a tomb. I couldn't stand the echo of her absence in every room, so I grabbed my keys and left. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I ended up at O'Connell's, a cozy pub on the edge of town where I used to go with some old college friends. It was the kind of place that smelled like wood smoke and spilled beer, the kind of place where no one expected you to be anything but another face in the crowd. The bartender, a guy named Rick who'd been there since forever, gave me a nod as I slid onto a stool at the end of the bar. "Daniel," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Haven't seen you in a while." "Yeah," I said, my voice rough. "Long time. What'll it be?" "Just a pint of dark ale." He nodded and turned away. I watched the bubbles rise in the glass he pulled, the way the foam curled and settled at the top. It felt like the only thing in my life that was still predictable. I took a long sip when he set it down in front of me. The beer was cold and bitter, and it hit the back of my throat like a slap. I let out a breath and closed my eyes for a second, just feeling the weight of the glass in my hand. Around me, the pub buzzed with low laughter and clinking glasses. It felt comforting in a way, like the world was still spinning, even if mine had come to a screeching halt. I stared down at the swirling foam, my thoughts drifting back to Lucy. I thought about every lie she'd told, every excuse she'd made. I thought about the way she used to look at me like I was the only person in the room, and then how that look had disappeared, replaced by the cold mask she wore whenever I asked too many questions. I remembered the nights she came home late, claiming she was helping a friend or staying late at the office. The times she'd pull away from me in bed, saying she was too tired, too stressed. I'd tried so hard to believe her, to give her the benefit of the doubt. But now I knew the truth. She was never really mine in those moments. She was already gone. I took another sip of the ale, the bitterness almost comforting. It was something solid in the haze of everything else. I thought about the sculptures in my studio, the rough marble that I could mold and shape into something beautiful. How I'd always believed that if I worked hard enough, I could shape my life the same way. But love isn't like marble. It can't be carved into something perfect just because you want it to be. The bartender came by to top off my glass, and I nodded my thanks. "Rough night?" he asked, his voice low enough that I knew he wasn't just being polite. "Yeah," I said. "You could say that." He didn't push, just nodded and moved on to the next customer. That's what I liked about this place. No one asked for more than you were willing to give. I sat there for what felt like hours, nursing my drink and listening to the quiet hum of the pub around me. I didn't know what tomorrow was going to look like. Hell, I didn't even know what I was going to do when I got home. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I realized something as I sat there, spinning the glass in my hands. Lucy's betrayal didn't define me. It didn't get to decide who I was or what kind of man I wanted to be. She'd made her choices, and now I was making mine. I finished my drink and stood up, feeling the weight of the night settle over my shoulders. I knew there would still be bad days ahead. Days when I'd hear her voice in my head or wake up reaching for her in the dark. But there would be good days, too. Days when I'd find my rhythm again, in the studio and in my own skin. And as I stepped out into the cold night air, I promised myself one thing. I was going to be okay. Because no matter what Lucy had done, I still had me. And that was enough. I stepped out of the pub feeling steadier than I had in weeks. The cold night air hit me like a jolt, clearing the fog of the beer and the hurt that had been clouding my mind. I pulled my coat tighter around me and started walking back to the apartment, each step crunching against the wet pavement like a quiet promise to myself. I was done letting this break me. When I turned onto our street, I saw her car parked across the road. Its headlights off but the engine still running. Lucy was standing on the sidewalk, her arms wrapped around her waist, her face pale in the glow of the street lamp. She looked small, almost fragile, like she'd been waiting there for hours. She saw me and straightened, her breath coming out in shaky clouds. "Daniel," she said, her voice trembling. "Can we please talk?" I stopped a few feet away, my hands jammed into my pockets. What is there left to say? She took a step closer, her eyes pleading. "I made a mistake. I know that now. I don't want this to be how it ends." I felt the old instinct to comfort her, to pull her into my arms and promise her everything would be okay. But I stayed where I was, the weight of her betrayal still too raw to let me move. "You're the one who ended it, Lucy," I said quietly. "You ended it the moment you let someone else into our life." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I was stupid and selfish, and I thought I needed something different. But I was wrong. I see that now." She reached for me, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I can't do this anymore. I won't." Tears filled her eyes, and she let out a shaky breath. "Please, Daniel. There has to be a way to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll quit my job. I'll cut him out of my life completely. Just don't walk away from us." I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman I'd loved for 5 years. The woman who'd shared my bed and my dreams. And I realized that no matter how much I'd loved her, no matter how much I'd wanted to believe in us, I didn't recognize her anymore. I took a deep breath and shook my head. "Lucy, I loved you with everything I had. I would have done anything to save us. But you made your choice, and I can't be the only one fighting for something that's already gone." She let out a choked sob, covering her mouth with her hand. "But I love you," she said, her voice breaking. I felt a flicker of pain at her words, but it was just a ghost of what I used to feel. "Maybe you do," I said softly. "But love doesn't mean much when it's mixed with betrayal." For a long moment, we just stood there, the cold night air swirling around us. She wiped her eyes, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "So that's it?" she whispered. I nodded slowly. "That's it." She opened her mouth to say something else, but I turned away before she could. I took a step back toward the pub, the warm glow of the windows calling to me like a refuge. I didn't look back as I walked away, my heart heavy but my mind finally clear. She didn't follow. I heard her soft sobs echo in the darkness, but I didn't stop. I didn't know her that anymore. When I reached the door of the pub, I paused and turned back for one last look. She was still standing there, framed by the street lamp, her tears glinting like stars in the cold night. But she was just a shadow now, a part of my past that I was ready to leave behind. I opened the door and stepped back inside, the warm air washing over me like a balm. And as I sat down at the bar and ordered another pint, I realized something. I was done with the past. Done with trying to fix something that was never really mine to save. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. It didn't take long for the rumors to reach me. Lucy had moved in with him, her lover, the man she'd traded our quiet life for. Caleb, I'd heard his name was an ad executive, the kind of guy who thrived on bright lights and fast cars. Someone who promised her the kind of excitement she claimed I never could. First, I tried to ignore it. I buried myself in my work, let the clay and marble distract me from the ache in my chest. But every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of them on social media, pictures of brunches in trendy cafes, of trips to the coast. Her smile was there, wide and easy. The same smile she used to give me when we'd sit on the couch and watch the sun go down through the windows. It was like watching my own life on repeat. Except this time, I was just a spectator. For a while, I thought maybe she'd finally found what she was looking for. Maybe he was the missing piece she'd been searching for when she turned away from me. But deep down, I knew better. A couple months later, I heard from a mutual friend that things weren't so perfect in that bright new life. Lucy had started coming home late again, making excuses that didn't quite add up. Caleb, for all his charm, wasn't blind. He started asking questions: where she was, who she was with, the same questions I used to ask, the same uneasy suspicion growing in his voice. She'd shrug it off the way she always did. "It's just work," she'd say, her phone still in her hand. "You're overthinking it." But I knew. I'd lived it. A few weeks after that, I ran into Caleb by chance. I was at a hardware store picking up some materials for a new piece I was working on. He was there, too, looking lost in an aisle of power tools he probably didn't know how to use. We locked eyes, and I saw it there in his face, the same hollow look I used to see in the mirror. He gave me a stiff nod, like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. I didn't say anything either. There wasn't much to say. I heard later that it all fell apart not long after that. Caleb had confronted her, finally, about the late nights and the locked phone. And she'd given him the same cryptic answer she'd once given me. "It's just who I am." He couldn't take it. He moved out a week later. For a moment, I felt a flicker of something like vindication. Like maybe, finally, someone else understood. But it was gone almost as soon as it came, replaced by a quiet, heavy sadness. Because Caleb was just another me, another man who thought he could fill the void inside her. The truth was, Lucy's search for excitement was never about the people she left behind. It was about her. The way she needed to keep moving, to keep chasing something new. The way she'd convince herself that the next thrill would finally be enough. I didn't hear from her again after that. She disappeared from my life completely, just like I knew she would. And in a strange way, that was a relief. I didn't want her to reach out, didn't want her apologies or her tears. I'd already heard them all before. I stood in my studio one night, the chisel heavy in my hand, and thought about how the cycle had played out again. How it would probably keep playing out long after I was gone. I thought about the man I used to be, the man who believed that love could fix anything, if you just tried hard enough. But love isn't enough when you're the only one fighting for it. And I'd stopped fighting a long time ago. I went back to work that night, the steady rhythm of the chisel against stone filling the quiet. The cold marble didn't lie, didn't change. It was exactly what it was, and I could shape it into something beautiful if I put in the time. Lucy would keep chasing her excitement, and maybe she'd find it one day. Or maybe she'd just keep running, always searching and never stopping long enough to see what she'd lost along the way. As for me, I was done being part of her story. My life was my own again, and for the first time in a long time, that was enough. A few months later, I found myself settling into a life that felt more like mine than anything had in years. The apartment, once echoing with Lucy's laughter and then with silence, was now filled with the soft clatter of my tools and the quiet hum of my radio. The clutter of our shared life was gone, replaced by sketches of sculptures and unfinished pieces that finally had my full attention. I spent my days in my studio, the scent of marble dust and fresh clay grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in years. Friends I hadn't seen in too long started to trickle back in: old college buddies, artists from the co-op downtown, even my neighbor Jim, who always showed up with a six-pack and a story to tell. It felt good to be around people who didn't see me as a husband or a half of something, but just as me. Then one rainy evening, my phone buzzed with a message that took me right back to the past. Lucy. She wanted to meet. She said she needed closure, needed to see me one last time. The old part of me, the one that still remembered the way she'd smile when she curled up next to me, almost said no. But the part of me that had spent months carving out a new life was curious enough to say yes. We met at a little cafe downtown, the kind of place that smelled like burnt coffee and fresh bread. I picked the table by the window where the rain streaked down the glass like tears neither of us could bring ourselves to shed. Lucy walked in a few minutes later, her hair damp and her coat buttoned up tight. She looked tired, older, somehow. She smiled when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, Daniel," she said softly, sliding into the seat across from me. "Hi, Lucy." My voice sounded calm, steady, even though my heart was pounding in my chest. What did you want to talk about? She sighed, fidgeting with the cup of tea she ordered but hadn't touched. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. For how I hurt you. I watched her for a moment, the way her shoulders hunched like she was bracing for impact. I know, I said. But it's too late for sorry, Lucy. I know, she said again, her voice cracking. I just needed you to hear it. I needed you to know that I did love you. In my own way. I looked out the window, the rain blurring the world beyond the glass. Maybe you did, I said. But love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice. And you made your choice. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I did, she whispered. And I'm paying for it. Caleb, he left too. He said I was too much or not enough. I don't even know anymore. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I could see it in the way her hands shook, the way her shoulders shook with every breath. I'm trying to figure out who I am, she said, her voice small. But it's hard. I hope you find it, I said simply. And I meant it. Because for all the hurt, I didn't wish her more of it. She wiped her eyes and tried to smile. You always were the better one, Daniel. Even when I didn't see it. I shrugged, the weight of her words sliding off me like rain off a roof. Maybe, I said. Or maybe I just stopped trying to fix something that was never mine to fix. She nodded, her eyes sad but resigned. I should go, she said quietly, standing up. I stood too, grabbing my coat. Take care of yourself, Lucy. You too, Daniel, she said, and for the first time in a long time, I believed she meant it. I watched her walk out of the cafe and into the rain, her figure blurring into the gray of the city streets. I didn't feel relief or sadness or regret. Just a calm, quiet sense that the chapter had finally closed. I paid for my coffee and stepped back out into the rain, the cold drops washing over me like a promise. I had my work, my friends, and my art. I had the steady weight of the chisel in my hand and the knowledge that I could still shape something beautiful out of the wreckage. I walked home that night, the city lights blinking through the rain, and felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. And I knew finally that I was going to be okay.